Billionaire CEO traps his beautiful intern in the office and finally reveals his secret desire. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, sealing her fate for the next 60 floors. Leah Monroe adjusted her navy blazer and checked her reflection in the polished steel walls of the executive elevator. 25 years old, fresh out of graduate school, and about to step into the corporate fortress of Blake Digital Security, one of America's most powerful tech empires. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained calm. She'd learned long ago that showing nerves was a luxury she couldn't afford. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 58th floor as she stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and perfectly styled auburn hair, looked up with a warm smile. "You must be Leah. I'm Beverly. Welcome to Blake Digital." "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." Leah's voice carried the right mix of professionalism and enthusiasm, a balance she'd perfected through countless interviews and rejections. Beverly's eyes twinkled with something that looked almost like sympathy. "Mr. Blake likes his interns to start with the basics. You'll be shadowing different departments this week, but he specifically requested you attend the executive briefing at 9. She paused, lowering her voice slightly. "Just remember, he's particular about punctuality." Leah nodded, filing away the warning. She'd researched Damon Blake extensively. 39 years old, self-made billionaire who'd built his digital security empire from a cramped apartment in Seattle. No scandals, no public relationships, no social media presence. A ghost in a world obsessed with oversharing. What she hadn't expected was the way her breath caught when she first saw him. He stood at the head of the conference table, his back to the room as he gazed out at the Chicago skyline. Tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. When he turned around, his eyes, a startling shade of gray-green, swept across the room with methodical precision. They stopped on her. For exactly 3 seconds, something flickered in his expression, something that made her pulse skip before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Good morning." His voice was low, controlled, carrying just enough authority to command absolute attention. "We have a situation with our Jakarta servers that requires immediate attention." For the next hour, Leah watched him orchestrate solutions with the precision of a chess master. He spoke in measured sentences, never wasted words, never raised his voice. Yet everyone in the room hung on his every syllable. She found herself studying the small details, the way his fingers drummed once against the table when someone suggested a solution he'd already considered and dismissed, the slight tightening around his eyes when discussing potential client impact, the careful way he avoided looking in her direction after that initial moment. When the meeting ended, executives filed out in clusters of hushed conversation. Leah gathered her notebook, preparing to follow, when his voice stopped her. "Miss Monroe." She turned back to find him still seated, his attention now focused entirely on her. The conference room suddenly felt much smaller. "Yes, Mr. Blake? Beverly mentioned you're studying organizational psychology." He leaned back in his chair, and she caught a glimpse of something beneath the CEO facade. Curiosity, maybe. "What's your assessment of this morning's dynamic?" It was clearly a test. Leah considered her words carefully. "You already knew the solution before calling the meeting." This was about ensuring buy-in and identifying who had done their homework. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "And? Jenkins hadn't read the Jakarta reports. Morrison had, but she's hesitant to contradict Thompson even when she's right. And you?" She hesitated. "Continue. You run meetings the way some people solve puzzles. You see the whole picture while everyone else is still looking for corner pieces." The silence stretched between them, thick with something unnamed. His gray-green eyes held hers with an intensity that made her acutely aware of her own breathing. "Beverly will provide you with this week's schedule," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll want your observations in writing by Friday." Leah nodded and turned toward the door, but his voice followed her one last time. "Miss Monroe?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Welcome to Blake Digital." There was something in the way he said her name that made her wonder if she was walking into more than just an internship. She shouldn't have been thinking about him at 2 in the morning. Leah stared at the ceiling of her cramped studio apartment, replaying every moment of her first day at Blake Digital. The way Damon Blake had looked at her during the meeting, the careful distance he'd maintained afterward, the way her name had sounded different when he said it. Professional boundaries, she reminded herself. He's your boss's boss's boss. But sleep remained elusive. The next morning brought a surprise. Beverly greeted her with a steaming coffee cup and an apologetic smile. "Change of plans, honey. Mr. Blake wants you to shadow him today instead of rotating through departments." Leah's stomach flipped. Did he say why? He mentioned something about observing executive decision-making in real time. Beverly's expression suggested she found this explanation as unusual as Leah did. Fair warning. His calendar is packed. Board calls, client meetings, and a lunch with potential investors from Tokyo. 20 minutes later, Leah found herself seated in a corner of Damon's office, notepad ready, trying not to stare at the way morning sunlight caught the silver threads in his dark hair. His office was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist, powerful, with a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. What she hadn't expected was how quietly he worked. No shouting into phones, no dramatic gestures, just calm, measured responses that somehow carried more weight than any raised voice could. "The Jakarta situation is contained," he said into his headset, never looking up from the documents spread across his desk. "But I want our team to run a full diagnostic on the Singapore servers as well. If there's a pattern, I'd rather find it ourselves than let our clients discover it first." He ended the call and finally glanced in her direction. "Questions so far? You anticipate problems that haven't happened yet." "In my experience, Miss Monroe, catastrophes announce themselves through whispers long before they start shouting." He stood and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "What else have you observed?" Leah hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. "You haven't made eye contact with anyone during your calls. You focus on documents, the window, your hands, but you remember everything they say." He turned, and for a moment she caught something unguarded in his expression. "And your interpretation? Either you find people easier to read through their voices or—" She stopped herself. Or you're protecting yourself from something." The silence that followed felt charged, electric. Damon's gray-green eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget they weren't alone in the building. "You're very perceptive, Miss Monroe." Before she could respond, Beverly's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Blake, the Tokyo investors are here for lunch." The spell broke. Damon straightened, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Of course. We'll take this to the executive dining room." The lunch was a masterclass in corporate diplomacy. Damon spoke flawless Japanese with their guests, his manner warm but respectful. Leah watched him navigate cultural nuances with the same precision he applied to business decisions. But she also noticed the way his attention flickered to her whenever she took notes, the way he subtly redirected conversation when one of the investors asked about her lovely assistant. After the investors left, they returned to his office. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, and something about the golden light made everything feel more intimate, more dangerous. "Your observations today?" Damon asked, loosening his tie slightly. Leah consulted her notes, though she hardly needed them. "You switch languages the way other people change tools. You use silence as effectively as words. And you—" She paused. "Continue. You protected me during lunch. When Mr. Tanaka assumed I was your assistant, you could have corrected him by explaining my role. Instead, you changed the subject." Damon moved closer, close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive that made her pulse quicken. "Why do you think I did that?" The question hung between them, loaded with subtext. Leah's logical mind screamed warnings, but her heart had other ideas. "Because you don't want them to see me as just an intern." "No," he said quietly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I don't." The admission settled between them like a confession. Leah felt her breath catch as he took another step closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Mr. Blake." "Damon," he corrected, and hearing his first name from his own lips felt like crossing an invisible line. "When it's just us, call me Damon." Her notebook slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, pages scattering across the Persian rug. As she bent to collect them, he knelt beside her, their hands brushing as they reached for the same page. The touch was electric, sending heat shooting up her arm and straight to her heart. They froze, kneeling on his office floor, hands touching, eyes locked. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the windows, but neither of them noticed. "This is a mistake," Leah whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Probably." Damon agreed, his thumb tracing across her knuckles with agonizing gentleness. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since yesterday morning. The confession should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like validation. But before either of them could move closer, Beverly's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Mr. Blake, your 4 o'clock is here. They sprang apart, the spell broken. Damon stood first, extending a hand to help her up. The gesture was perfectly professional, but his fingers lingered against hers, just a second longer than necessary. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow, he said, his voice carefully controlled. As Leah gathered her scattered notes and prepared to leave, she caught her reflection in the dark window. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something dangerous. Walking toward the elevator, one thought echoed in her mind. She was falling for a man who could destroy her career with a single word. And the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she cared. The coffee shop on the first floor buzzed with the usual morning chaos, but Leah barely noticed. She'd arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to clear her head before facing Damon again. Yesterday's moment in his office had replayed in her mind all night. The weight of his confession, the electricity of his touch, the way he'd said her name like a prayer he wasn't supposed to know. You look like someone who needs caffeine and conversation. Leah glanced up to find a woman about her age sliding into the opposite chair. Shoulder-length blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that managed to be both friendly and knowing. I'm sorry, do we... Iris Chen. Senior analyst, 4th floor. The woman extended her hand with easy confidence. And you're the intern who has everyone talking. Leah's stomach dropped. Talking about what? Iris laughed, a warm sound that somehow made the knot in Leah's chest loosen slightly. Relax. Good things. Word is you impressed the Ice King himself yesterday. Ice King? Damon Blake, though honestly that nickname never fit. He's not cold. He's just... Iris paused, choosing her words carefully. Careful. Very, very careful. Something in her tone made Leah lean forward. You know him well? I've worked here for 3 years, long enough to notice patterns. Iris stirred her latte thoughtfully. He's never taken a personal interest in an intern before. Hell, he's never taken a personal interest in anyone before. The implication hung between them, making Leah's pulse quicken with equal parts excitement and terror. I should probably get upstairs, Leah said, standing too quickly. Leah? Iris's voice stopped her. Whatever's happening between you two, be careful. Not because he's dangerous, but because he's never learned how to love someone without trying to protect them from everything, including himself. 20 minutes later, Leah stood outside Damon's office, her conversation with Iris echoing in her mind. Beverly wasn't at her desk yet, and the executive floor felt eerily quiet. She knocked softly and heard his voice call out, "Come in." Damon sat behind his desk, already immaculately dressed despite the early hour. But something was different. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. "You're early," he said, not looking up from his computer screen. "So are you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't sleep much. Bad dreams?" This time he did look up, and the intensity in his gray-green eyes made her breath catch. Something like that. The silence stretched between them, charged with yesterday's unfinished conversation. Leah moved closer to his desk, her heels silent on the thick carpet. "About yesterday," she began. "Was inappropriate," he finished, his voice carefully controlled. "I apologize. It won't happen again." The words hit her like a physical blow, but something in his expression didn't match his professional tone. She studied his face, remembering her psychology training, the micro-expressions that revealed what people really meant. "You're lying," she said softly, his hand stilled on the keyboard. "Excuse me. You're telling me it won't happen again, but you're gripping your coffee cup like you're trying to keep your hands busy. You haven't made eye contact since I walked in, and you've been here since, 5 in the morning? Because you couldn't sleep either." Damon leaned back in his chair, something shifting in his expression. "You're very observant, Miss Monroe." "It's Leah," she corrected, taking another step closer. "And yes, I am. It's what I do." "What do you see when you look at me?" The question was barely above a whisper, but it felt like a challenge. Leah moved around his desk, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to catch that woodsy scent that had haunted her dreams. "I see a man who's built walls so high he's forgotten there might be doors," she said. "I see someone who's convinced himself that wanting something makes him weak. And I see..." She hesitated. "What?" "I see someone who's terrified that if he lets himself feel, he might lose control." Damon stood slowly, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "And what if I do lose control?" he asked, his voice rough with something raw and honest. "What if I can't be the professional, appropriate boss you deserve? What if I can't stop thinking about the way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating, or the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're nervous?" Heat flooded through her at his words, at the evidence that he'd been watching her as intently as she'd been watching him. "What if?" she whispered. "I don't want you to be appropriate." The admission hung between them like a confession. Damon's eyes darkened, and she watched his legendary control begin to fray at the edges. Leah. Her name sounded different on his lips. Desperate, hungry, like he'd been starving for the chance to say it. He reached up, his fingers barely grazing her cheek, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. The contact sent electricity shooting through her entire body. "This could ruin everything," he said, but his thumb traced along her jaw with devastating gentleness. "Some things are worth the risk," she replied, covering his hand with hers. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with tension, his eyes dropping to her lips before meeting her gaze again. But then Beverly's voice echoed from the outer office, cheerfully greeting someone, and reality crashed back in. They sprang apart just as a knock sounded on his door. "Mr. Blake," Beverly's voice called. "The board meeting has been moved up to 8:30. "Thank you, Beverly," Damon called back, his voice remarkably steady considering the storm she could see brewing in his eyes. When Beverly's footsteps retreated, they looked at each other across the suddenly vast space of his office. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly. "No," Leah agreed, her heart still racing. "It's not." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her one last time. "Leah?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Wear the blue dress tomorrow." The request was so unexpected, so intimate that it stole her breath. "How do you know I have a blue dress?" A slow, devastating smile crossed his face. The first real smile she'd seen from him. "Because I notice everything about you." Walking to the elevator, Leah's hands trembled as she pressed the button. She was playing with fire, and they both knew it. But as the doors closed, she was already planning to wear the blue dress. She wore the blue dress. It was a simple navy sheath that hugged her curves modestly, professional enough for the office but somehow making her feel beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fabric or design. As Leah stepped off the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. The answer came when she saw Damon's face. He was standing by Beverly's desk, discussing something about quarterly reports, but the moment his eyes found her, the conversation died mid-sentence. His gaze traveled from her face down to the dress and back up again, slowly, deliberately, like he was memorizing every detail. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," she said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way her pulse hammered against her throat. "Miss Monroe." His voice carried a rough edge that made heat pool low in her stomach. "Beautiful dress." Beverly glanced between them with raised eyebrows, clearly sensing the undercurrents but too professional to comment. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Beverly said tactfully. "The clients from Portland." Damon's attention reluctantly shifted back to business. "Send them to conference room A. Miss Monroe, you'll be observing today's presentation." The meeting was torture. Leah sat in the corner, pretending to take notes while hyper-aware of every movement Damon made. The way he commanded the room with quiet authority. The way his hands moved as he explained complex security protocols. The way his eyes found hers whenever he thought no one else was looking. But it was the small things that undid her completely. The way he unconsciously adjusted his tie when their eyes met. How he'd pause mid-sentence when she shifted in her chair, as if her presence disrupted his legendary focus. The way he'd started incorporating phrases she'd used in previous conversations, like he'd been thinking about her words as much as she'd been thinking about his. When the Portland clients left, satisfied and impressed, Damon dismissed the other executives with polite efficiency. Soon, it was just the two of them in the glass-walled conference room, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows. "Your assessment?" he asked, but his tone suggested business was the last thing on his mind. Leah closed her notebook, meeting his gaze directly. "You were distracted." "Was I?" "You referenced the Jakarta incident twice when you meant to cite the Singapore case study. You called Mr. Peterson Mr. Patterson 3 times. And you..." She hesitated. "Continue." "You kept looking at me like you were trying to memorize something." Damon moved closer, his footsteps silent on the carpet. Maybe I was. The admission hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Through the glass walls, Leah could see employees moving about their business, completely unaware of the electric tension crackling in conference room A. "Someone might see us," she whispered, but she didn't step away when he moved closer. "Let them," he said, his voice low and rough. "I'm tired of pretending you don't affect me." He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the war being fought in those gray-green depths, desire battling control, need warring with professionalism. Damon. His name felt like a secret on her lips. "I haven't slept in 2 days," he confessed, his hand coming up to trace along her jaw with devastating gentleness. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you. I hear your laugh. I remember the way you looked at me yesterday, like you could see straight through every wall I've built." Her breath caught as his thumb brushed across her lower lip, the touch so soft she might have imagined it if not for the fire it ignited in her veins. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know. We could both lose everything. I know that too." "Then why?" "Because," he said, his forehead nearly touching hers now, "for the first time in my life, I've found something that might be worth the risk." The conference room door opened with a soft click, shattering the moment like glass. "Oh." A young man in an ill-fitting suit froze in the doorway, his face flushing crimson. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blake. I didn't realize. I was looking for the Henderson files and—" "10 minutes," Damon said calmly, stepping back from Leah with practiced ease. "The files are in conference room B." The intern, Marcus, she remembered from her first day, nodded frantically and disappeared, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Leah pressed a hand to her racing heart, reality crashing back in waves. "He saw us. He saw 2 colleagues having a conversation. Damon, he saw the way you were looking at me, the way you were touching me." The use of his first name seemed to ground him, reminding them both of the line they'd just crossed. He ran a hand through his dark hair, disrupting its perfect styling. "You're right." His voice carried a note of self-recrimination that made her chest ache. "This can't continue. Not here. Not like this." The dismissal should have relieved her, but instead, it felt like rejection. She gathered her notebook with hands that trembled slightly. "Of course. You're absolutely right. Professional boundaries." "Leah, stop." Her name on his lips stopped her mid-sentence. "That's not what I meant." She looked up, confusion clear in her dark eyes. "I meant," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "that we can't continue like this in the office, with glass walls and interruptions and the constant threat of discovery." Understanding dawned slowly, along with a thrill of anticipation that she tried unsuccessfully to suppress. "What are you saying?" Damon moved to his briefcase, pulling out a business card, but instead of his usual company information, this one was blank, except for an address written in his distinctive handwriting. "Tomorrow is Saturday," he said, holding out the card. "If you want to continue this conversation somewhere, we won't be interrupted." Leah stared at the card like it might bite her. Taking it felt like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of a safe landing. "And if I don't come?" Something vulnerable flickered across his features. "Then Monday morning we go back to being boss and intern. No questions asked, no awkwardness. I'll request you be transferred to a different department, and we'll pretend none of this happened." The card felt warm between her fingers, like it carried some of his heat. "What time?" 7. "There's something I want to show you." As she turned to leave, his voice followed her one last time. "Leah?" She paused at the door. "Whatever you decide." "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to want something more than success." Walking back to her temporary desk, the card hidden in her palm, Leah's mind raced. She had less than 24 hours to decide whether to cross a line that could change everything. But deep down, she already knew her answer. Some risks were worth taking. The address led her to the edge of nowhere. Leah parked her old Honda beside a weathered wooden gate, checking the GPS on her phone for the 3rd time. She'd expected a restaurant, maybe his penthouse apartment, somewhere that screamed billionaire CEO. Instead, she found herself staring at what looked like an abandoned dirt road winding into dense Illinois woodland. The card in her hand felt heavier than paper had any right to. She'd spent Friday night pacing her tiny apartment, weighing consequences against the ache in her chest every time she remembered the way he'd said her name. By Saturday morning, she'd changed outfits 4 times, settling finally on dark jeans and a cream sweater, casual enough for whatever this was, but still flattering enough to give her confidence. Now, standing beside her car at exactly 7 o'clock, that confidence felt as fragile as morning mist. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Damon emerged from the tree line, and she barely recognized him. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, replaced by dark jeans, hiking boots, and a charcoal sweater that clung to his broad shoulders. His hair was tousled by wind, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked approachable, human. "You came," he said, and she caught the note of surprise in his voice. "You sound like you expected me to change my mind. I hoped you wouldn't." He moved closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes. "But I would have understood if you had. Where exactly are we?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not his careful professional smile, but something real and unguarded. "Somewhere I can show you who I am when I'm not being Damon Blake, CEO. He gestured toward the wooded path. "It's about a 10-minute walk. I promise it's worth it." The trail wound through towering oaks and maples, their leaves a riot of autumn color overhead. Birds called from hidden branches, and somewhere in the distance water gurgled over stones. It was peaceful in a way that made the city feel like another planet entirely. "How did you find this place?" Leah asked as they walked side by side, careful not to let their hands accidentally brush. "I bought it," he said simply. "About 5 years ago. The previous owner was going to sell to developers who wanted to build a shopping complex. You bought an entire forest to save it from becoming a mall?" "Something like that." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds their footsteps on the leaf-strewn path and the whisper of wind through branches. Leah found herself stealing glances at him, fascinated by this version of Damon Blake, relaxed, unguarded, almost boyish in his enthusiasm for the natural beauty around them. "Tell me something," she said suddenly. "Something real, something you've never told anyone else." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "I used to come to places like this with my grandfather when I was a kid. He'd take me fishing or hiking, and for those few hours I could forget about everything else. My parents' expectations, the pressure to be perfect, the loneliness of being the only child in a house that felt more like a museum than a home." His words painted a picture that made her heart ache. A small boy seeking refuge in nature from a world that demanded too much too soon. "What happened to him?" "Heart attack when I was 16. After that?" Damon shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "After that, there was no more time for forests or fishing. Just business school and board meetings and building the empire everyone expected me to build. Until now." "Until now," he agreed, his gaze finding hers. "Until you reminded me that some things matter more than quarterly profits." They crested a small hill, and Leah gasped. Before them lay a perfectly preserved lake, its surface like dark glass reflecting the canopy of trees. A small wooden dock extended into the water, and someone had built a simple fire pit surrounded by weathered Adirondack chairs on the shore. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I come here when I need to think, when the corporate world gets too loud, too demanding." He led her down toward the water's edge. "I've never brought anyone else here." The admission hung between them, weighted with significance. Leah sank into one of the chairs, overwhelmed by the beauty of the place and the trust implicit in his sharing it with her. "Why me?" she asked. "Why now?" Damon settled into the chair beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Because you see me, the real me, not the title or the money or the reputation, just me." "And who is the real you?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the lake. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Someone who spent so long being what everyone else needed that I forgot who I wanted to be. Someone who convinced himself that being alone was safer than risking disappointment. Someone who—" He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "Someone who's falling in love for the first time in his life and has no idea how to do it without destroying everything he's worked for." The confession hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and sending her heart into overdrive. "Love." He'd said love. "Damon, I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably the most irresponsible thing I've ever done. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just attraction or curiosity or some midlife crisis." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers with devastating gentleness. "I'm in love with you, Leah Monroe, and I have absolutely no idea what to do about it." The world seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called mournfully, and the sound echoed across the water like a prayer. Leah stared at their joined hands, at the contrast between his long, elegant fingers and her smaller ones. She thought about all the reasons this was impossible: the power imbalance, the professional consequences, the risk to both their futures. But then she looked up into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there: the longing, the fear, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, love could conquer the practical realities that stood between them. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." "We could lose everything." "We could," he agreed. "Or we could find something worth keeping." As the sun began to set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Leah made her choice. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid the moment might shatter if they moved too quickly. But then his free hand came up to cup her cheek, and she melted into him, pouring 3 weeks of longing and confusion and desperate want into the connection between their lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the last of the daylight was fading into twilight. "What happens now?" she asked against his forehead. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can't go back to pretending I don't love you." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, hands still intertwined, Leah realized that whatever came next, everything had changed. There would be no going back to simple professional courtesy. The question was, would they find a way forward together, or would love destroy them both? Monday morning felt like stepping into a minefield. Leah stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb. Her reflection multiplied endlessly in the polished steel walls. The weekend felt like a dream. Damon's confession by the lake, the kiss that had changed everything, the way they'd held each other as stars appeared over the water. But dreams ended when reality began, and reality was a 58-floor building filled with people who could destroy both their careers with a single whispered rumor. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors opened to reveal the executive floor. Beverly looked up with her usual warm smile, but Leah caught something different in her expression, a sharpness, a calculating look that made her stomach clench. "Good morning, honey. Mr. Blake is already in his office. He asked to see you the moment you arrived." "Thank you," Leah managed, her voice steadier than she felt. The walk to Damon's office felt endless. Through the glass walls, she could see other executives arriving, coffee cups in hand, already deep in Monday morning conversations. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that her entire world had shifted on its axis. She knocked softly and heard his familiar voice call, "Come in." Damon sat behind his desk, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit and silver tie. But when he looked up, she saw the same uncertainty in his gray-green eyes that had kept her awake all night. "Close the door," he said quietly. The soft click of the latch seemed to echo through the room. They stared at each other across the expanse of his office, the memory of Saturday night hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "How are you?" he asked, and despite the simple words, she heard everything he really meant. "Are you okay? Do you regret it? Are we going to survive this?" "Terrified," she admitted. "You?" A rueful smile touched his lips. "Terrified doesn't begin to cover it." He stood and moved around his desk, stopping just close enough that she could catch his familiar scent, woodsy cologne and something uniquely him that made her pulse quicken despite her anxiety. "We need to establish some ground rules," he said, his voice taking on the professional tone she knew so well. But his eyes remained soft, intimate, like he was speaking in 2 languages at once, such as, "In this building, during business hours, nothing has changed. You're still an intern, I'm still the CEO. We maintain absolute professionalism." The words should have reassured her, but instead, they felt like a wall going up between them. And outside the building, his expression softened, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Outside this building, we figure out how to navigate whatever this is between us." Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. They sprang apart just as the door opened to reveal a man in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his pale blue eyes missing nothing as they took in the scene. "Damon." The man's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Every muscle in Damon's body went rigid. "Father, I wasn't expecting you. Father." Leah's blood ran cold as she realized she was looking at Harrison Blake, chairman of Blake Digital's board of directors, and one of the most powerful men in Chicago business circles. Clearly, Harrison's gaze flicked to Leah, and she felt like a bug under a microscope. "And you are?" "Leah Monroe, sir. I'm an intern in the organizational psychology program." "Ah, yes, the intern." Something in his tone made her skin crawl. "I've been hearing interesting things about you, Miss Monroe." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Damon stepped slightly forward, a subtle but unmistakable protective gesture. "What brings you here unannounced?" Damon asked, his voice carefully controlled. Harrison smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "Can't a father visit his son's workplace? Besides, I wanted to discuss the Henderson merger, in private." The dismissal was clear. Leah gathered her notebook, acutely aware of Harrison's cold gaze following her every movement. "Miss Monroe," Harrison's voice stopped her at the door. "A word of advice from someone with more experience in corporate dynamics. Be very careful about the lines you choose to cross. Some mistakes can't be undone." The threat was barely veiled, but crystal clear. Leah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the door. "Have a good day, Mr. Blake," she said formally, not daring to look at Damon as she left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but she could hear Harrison's voice through the wood, cold, disapproving, dangerous. Beverly looked up as she passed, and this time there was no mistaking the knowledge in her eyes. "Honey?" Beverly's voice was gentler than usual. "Be careful." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and reports, but Leah couldn't concentrate. Harrison Blake's words echoed in her mind. Some mistakes can't be undone. Around noon, Iris appeared at her temporary desk, sliding a cup of coffee across the surface. "You look like death warmed over," Iris said without preamble. "Want to talk about it?" "Not here," Leah murmured, glancing around at the other employees. "Roof deck, 5 minutes." The building's roof deck was usually deserted during lunch hour, offering a spectacular view of Chicago's skyline and blessed privacy. Iris led her to a corner table, far from any potential eavesdroppers. "So," Iris said without preamble, "Harrison Blake showed up this morning looking like he wanted to set something on fire. Damon's been locked in his office since then, refusing all calls. And you look like someone ran over your puppy. Connect the dots for me." Leah stared out at the city sprawling below them. "What do you know about Harrison Blake?" "Enough to know that crossing him is career suicide." Iris leaned forward, her expression serious. "Leah, whatever's going on between you and Damon, his father is not someone you want as an enemy. What if it's too late for that?" Iris was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "You slept with him?" "No." The denial came out sharper than intended. "We didn't. It's complicated." "Honey, it's only complicated if you're in love with him." The truth must have shown on her face because Iris sat back with a low whistle. "Oh, Leah, you're in love with Damon Blake. This is a disaster," Leah whispered, burying her face in her hands. "Maybe, or maybe it's the best thing that's ever happened to either of you." Iris reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "But you need to know what you're up against. Harrison Blake has destroyed people for less than looking at his son the wrong way." As if summoned by their conversation, Leah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "My office, 6 p.m. Come alone." Nishi showed the message to Iris, who raised an eyebrow. "After hours. Smart, but also dangerous." "Why dangerous?" "Because," Iris said grimly, "that's when the real conversations happen, the ones that change everything." As they rode the elevator back down, Leah's mind raced. In 6 hours, she would face Damon again, away from prying eyes and professional pretenses. They would have to decide what they were willing to risk, what they were willing to sacrifice, and whether their love was strong enough to survive the storm that Harrison Blake was undoubtedly brewing. The elevator doors opened, and as she stepped back into the corporate battlefield, one thought echoed in her mind. Some wars were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. At 6 o'clock, the executive floor felt like a ghost town. Leah's footsteps echoed softly on the marble as she made her way through the dimly lit corridors. Most of the offices were dark, their occupants long gone to suburban homes and family dinners. Only Damon's office glowed with warm light, a beacon in the corporate darkness. She found him standing at the window, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and something about his posture, shoulders slightly hunched, head bowed, spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "You came," he said without turning around. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "After this morning, I wasn't sure." He turned then, and the pain in his gray-green eyes made her chest tighten. "My father can be very persuasive when he wants to be." Leah moved closer, close enough to see the tension lines around his eyes, the way his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled from running his fingers through it. "What did he say to you?" Damon's laugh was bitter. He offered you a full scholarship to finish your master's degree at Northwestern, complete with a guaranteed position at a prestigious consulting firm in New York once you graduate. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Contingent, of course, on you completing your internship here without any further complications. You mean contingent on me staying away from you? In so many words, yes. Leah sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her mind reeling. A full scholarship, a guaranteed job in New York. It was everything she'd dreamed of when she'd first applied for graduate school. Everything she'd thought was beyond her reach as a first-generation college student drowning in loan debt. And if I don't take it? Damon's expression grew darker. He made it very clear that your internship could be terminated for any number of reasons. Poor performance, inappropriate conduct, budget cuts. He has a dozen ways to destroy your academic standing and your career prospects. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Outside, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars, beautiful and distant. There's more, Damon said quietly. More? He moved to his desk, pulling out a thick manila folder. He's had you investigated, Leah. Background check, financial records, academic history, social media posts from college. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. He knows about your mother's medical bills, your father leaving when you were 12, the 3 jobs you worked to pay for undergrad. Heat flooded her cheeks, part embarrassment, part rage. He had no right. No, he didn't. But he's never let rights or ethics stand in his way when he wants something. Damon's hands clenched into fists. He knows exactly how to hurt you, Leah, and he'll use every weapon he has. She stared at the folder, imagining her entire life reduced to data points and vulnerabilities. What about you? What did he threaten you with? The company. The words came out flat, emotionless. He still controls 40% of Blake Digital stock. Combined with his allies on the board, he could force me out. Everything I've built, everyone who depends on this company for their livelihood, gone. So that's it then. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. We're done before we even started. That's what he's counting on. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. But Damon moved around his desk, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye level. His hands covered hers, warm and steady despite everything. But I'm tired of letting him dictate my life. I've spent 39 years being the perfect son, the obedient heir, the man he wanted me to be. And for what? So I could end up alone in a glass tower, surrounded by success that feels empty? His thumbs traced across her knuckles, the gesture achingly tender. You asked me Saturday night who the real me was. The real me is someone who would rather fight for love and lose than live safely without it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Damon, I won't ask you to sacrifice your future for me. If you want to take his offer, I'll understand. I'll even help you get set up in New York, make sure you have everything you need. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her frustration and fear and desperate love into the connection between their lips. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, her decision was crystal clear. I'm not going to New York, she said firmly. Leah, think about what you're giving up. I'm thinking about what I'd be giving up if I walked away from this, from us. She cupped his face in her hands, memorizing the planes and angles, the way his eyes darkened when she touched him. Some things are worth fighting for. Relief flooded his expression, followed quickly by something that looked like fear. This won't be easy. He'll come at us from every angle, professionally, personally, financially. Are you prepared for that? Are you? I've been preparing for war with my father my entire life. I just never had a reason worth fighting for before. They held each other in the gathering darkness, the weight of their decision settling around them like armor. Outside, Chicago hummed with life, people heading home to families, couples sharing dinner, ordinary people living ordinary lives without the specter of corporate warfare hanging over their heads. What's our first move? Leah asked against his shoulder. We get ahead of this. Document everything. Build our own allies. Make sure we're legally bulletproof. His arms tightened around her. And we do it together. As if summoned by their conversation, the soft chime of an elevator broke the silence. They sprang apart, hearts racing, as footsteps approached down the hallway. Beverly appeared in the doorway, her usual warm demeanor replaced by something grimmer. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you both need to see this. She held up her phone, and even from across the room, Leah could see it was displaying some kind of gossip blog. Beverly, Damon started. Chicago Business Weekly just posted an article titled Blake Digital CEO's Inappropriate Relationship with Young Intern. Beverly's voice was steady, but Leah could see the concern in her eyes. It includes photos. The world tilted. Somehow, Harrison Blake had moved faster than they'd anticipated. Photos of what? Leah's voice came out as barely a whisper. Beverly's expression was sympathetic but grim. You two in the conference room last week, the parking garage Saturday evening, and she hesitated. And Damon's voice was dangerously quiet. The lake house. Someone was watching you. The bottom fell out of Leah's world. Not only had Harrison Blake been investigating her, he'd been having them followed. Their most private moment, their declaration of love by the water, had been violated by some stranger with a telephoto lens. How bad is it? Damon asked. It's trending on 3 social media platforms. The story's been picked up by 2 major business publications, and Beverly took a deep breath. HR wants to see both of you first thing in the morning. As the implications sank in, Leah realized that the war they'd just declared had already begun, and they were losing. The headlines were everywhere. Leah's phone buzzed incessantly as she sat in her car outside Blake Digital at 7:30 the next morning, an hour before her scheduled HR meeting. Each notification brought another news alert, another social media mention, another photograph of her and Damon splashed across gossip sites with increasingly salacious headlines. Power play, Blake Digital CEO caught in scandalous affair. From intern to mistress, the Leah Monroe story. Billionaire's secret romance rocks Chicago business world. The photos were damning. Her and Damon in the conference room, bodies close, his hand touching her face. Walking to their cars in the parking garage, the tension between them obvious even in grainy surveillance footage. And worst of all, the lake house, their first kiss captured in devastating detail, turning their most private moment into public entertainment. Her mother had called 6 times, her graduate advisor twice. Even her college roommate had texted asking if the woman in the photos was really her. The passenger door opened, startling her from her spiral of anxiety. Damon slid into the seat beside her, and she was shocked by his appearance. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his expensive suit looked like he'd slept in it. "Have you been home at all?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep. Spent the night at the office going through legal documents with our attorneys." He reached for her hand, his fingers cold despite the morning warmth. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." She showed him her phone. "They're calling me your mistress, and these are the polite headlines." His jaw tightened. "I'm going to destroy whoever sold those photos. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done." She leaned back against the headrest, exhaustion weighing down her bones. "I've been thinking, maybe I should just resign. Disappear. Let you clean up this mess without me making it worse." "No." The word came out sharp, final. "We're in this together, remember? We face whatever comes next as a team." "Damon, be realistic. You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I'm a graduate student from nowhere. Which one of us do you think the board will choose to sacrifice?" Before he could answer, her phone rang. Beverly's name flashed on the screen. "You should take that," Damon said. "Beverly?" Leah's voice was hoarse from a sleepless night. "Honey, where are you? There are reporters camped outside the main entrance. Security is trying to clear them, but..." Beverly's voice was tight with worry. "Reporters? Channel 7, Chicago Tribune, and at least 3 bloggers I recognize. They're asking for statements about the relationship, about company policy, about, well, everything." Leah's stomach lurched. "How do we get inside?" "Employee parking garage, sub-level 3. I'll meet you at the service elevator." 20 minutes later, they stood in the sterile conference room of Blake Digital's HR department. Across the table sat Margaret Winters, the company's chief human resources officer, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. "This is highly irregular," Margaret said without preamble, her gaze moving between Leah and Damon. "In my 20 years with this company, we've never had a situation quite like this. The situation is a private matter that was exploited by someone with malicious intent," Damon said, his CEO voice fully engaged. "Mr. Blake, with respect, there is nothing private about a CEO engaging in a romantic relationship with a subordinate. Company policy is very clear on this matter." Leah felt sick. "What exactly does company policy say?" Margaret opened a thick binder, reading directly from the page. "Romantic or sexual relationships between supervisors and subordinates are strictly prohibited due to the inherent power imbalance and potential for harassment claims. Violation of this policy is grounds for immediate termination." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "However," Margaret continued, Given the unusual circumstances and the publicity this has generated, the board of directors has requested an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. When? Damon asked. This afternoon at 2 o'clock. You're both expected to attend. After Margaret dismissed them, Leah and Damon rode the elevator to his floor in heavy silence. The usually bustling executive level felt different. Conversations stopped when they passed. Eyes followed their every movement. Whispers started the moment they were out of earshot. In his office, with the door firmly closed, the weight of their situation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. I should call my mother before she sees this on the news, Leah said, reaching for her phone. Leah, wait. Damon caught her hand. There's something else you need to know. About the board meeting this afternoon. Something in his tone made her blood run cold. What? My father called an emergency session. He's not just on the board. He's convinced 3 other members to support his position, which is that either you're terminated immediately and our relationship ends, or I step down as CEO. The ultimatum was everything she'd expected, and worse than she'd feared. Damon would have to choose between her and everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built. So we're back to impossible choices, she said quietly. Not impossible, just expensive. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Damon moved to his desk, pulling out a legal document thick with official seals and signatures. I spent last night with the lawyers working on this. It's my resignation letter and a transfer of my shares to a trust that would gradually sell them back to the company over 5 years. Leah's heart stopped. You're going to quit? If that's what it takes to protect you, yes. Damon, no. I won't let you destroy your life for me. You're not destroying anything. You're saving it. He moved closer, his hands framing her face with heartbreaking tenderness. For 39 years, I've been living someone else's version of success, building something that felt impressive from the outside but empty on the inside. You made me remember what it feels like to want something for myself. Tears burned her eyes. But the company will survive without me. The people I care about will be protected. I made sure of that. But I won't survive losing you. Through the glass walls of his office, she could see employees going about their business, unaware that the man they looked to for leadership was preparing to sacrifice everything for love. What if there's another way? She asked suddenly. What do you mean? What if we don't play by his rules? What if instead of choosing between impossible options, we create our own? Hope flickered in his eyes. I'm listening. Before she could explain her half-formed plan, Beverly's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Blake, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. What kind of development? Marcus from the Intern program is here. He says he has information about the photographs. Information that could change everything. Leah and Damon exchanged glances. Marcus, the nervous intern who had interrupted them in the conference room, who had seen just enough to be dangerous. Send him in, Damon said. As the door opened to admit the young man whose testimony could either save them or destroy them completely, Leah realized that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. The question was, would Marcus be their salvation or their final downfall? Marcus entered the office like a man walking to his execution. The young intern's hands shook as he clutched a manila envelope, his face pale beneath his unruly brown hair. He'd traded his usual ill-fitting suit for jeans and a wrinkled button-down, as if he'd dressed in a hurry, or hadn't slept at all. Please sit down, Damon said, his voice gentler than Leah had ever heard it. Marcus perched on the edge of a chair, the envelope balanced on his knees. I don't know where to start. Start with why you're here, Leah said softly. Because what's happening to you isn't right. And because, he swallowed hard, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. Because I know who took those pictures. The air in the room changed, crackling with sudden tension. Who? Damon's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out a series of photographs. But these weren't the grainy surveillance shots from the gossip sites. These were clear, high-resolution images taken with professional equipment. My roommate, Trevor Nash. He's a freelance photographer, does wedding gigs and corporate events to pay the bills, but he's been struggling lately, behind on rent, behind on his student loans. Marcus spread the photos across Damon's desk. They showed Trevor crouched in the woods near the lake house, telephoto lens trained on Leah and Damon's private moment. He got a call 3 weeks ago from someone offering him $5,000 for surveillance photos. Said it was for a divorce case, that he needed evidence of infidelity. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. Trevor thought it was easy money. He didn't know who you were until the pictures went public yesterday. Who hired him? Leah asked, though she already knew the answer. A man named Harrison Blake. Even expecting it, hearing the confirmation felt like a physical blow. Damon's father hadn't just investigated her. He'd been planning this destruction from the very beginning. "How do you know all this?" Damon asked. "Trevor came home last night in a panic. Said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd helped destroy innocent people." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing them a voice recording app. "He told me everything. I recorded it all." He pressed play, and Trevor's voice filled the room, thick with guilt and regret. "I met with Blake's guy at some fancy hotel downtown. Tall dude, expensive suit, gave me cash up front. Said they needed to document an inappropriate relationship, that it was for legal purposes. I thought it was just another cheating spouse case, you know. But then I saw the news this morning and realized, God, Marcus, I helped ruin that girl's life. She looked so happy in those pictures by the lake. And the recording continued, detailing meeting locations, payment schedules, and most damning of all, Harrison Blake's specific instructions to capture compromising photos regardless of context. "Why are you bringing this to us?" Damon asked when the recording ended. Marcus met his eyes directly for the first time. "Because 3 weeks ago you could have fired me for interrupting your meeting. Instead, you just corrected my mistake and moved on. You didn't humiliate me or make me feel stupid." His voice grew firmer. "And because Miss Monroe has been nothing but kind to everyone in the intern program, even when we asked dumb questions or got in her way." Tears burned behind Leah's eyes. In all the chaos and scandal, she'd forgotten about the small kindnesses, the human connections that made work feel like more than just a paycheck. "There's more," Marcus said, pulling out another document. Trevor kept copies of all his communications. Text messages, email confirmations, even a bank deposit slip showing payment from one of Harrison Blake's shell companies. Damon studied the evidence with the focus of a man seeing salvation. "This proves entrapment, invasion of privacy, possibly industrial espionage. It proves your father is a manipulative bastard," Leah said bluntly. "That too." A soft knock interrupted them. Beverly peered around the door, her expression urgent. "The board meeting has been moved up to noon. They're saying it's due to media pressure." Damon checked his watch. 11:45. "Marcus," he said, standing with sudden purpose, "would you be willing to testify to the board about what you've told us?" The young man paled but nodded. "If it helps, yes. It will help more than you know." 15 minutes later, they sat around the polished conference table in Blake Digital's boardroom. The 7 board members looked like a tribunal, their faces grave with the weight of corporate justice. Harrison Blake sat at the far end, his expression coldly satisfied until he saw Marcus enter behind Damon and Leah. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison demanded. "This is a closed board session. Mr. Nash has relevant testimony regarding the photographs that prompted this emergency meeting," Damon said calmly. Board Chairwoman Catherine Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Mr. Nash, please state your connection to this matter." Marcus's voice shook at first, but grew stronger as he told his story. The board members' expressions shifted from skeptical to shocked to outraged as the evidence mounted. Photographs of Trevor in the woods, recorded confessions, financial records proving Harrison's involvement. "Are you alleging," Catherine Walsh said slowly, "that a member of this board orchestrated the surveillance and public humiliation of a company employee?" "I'm not alleging it," Marcus replied, his voice steady now. "I'm proving it." Harrison's facade finally cracked. "This is fabrication, a desperate attempt by my son to avoid the consequences of his unprofessional behavior." "Dad," Damon's voice cut through the bluster like a blade. "Stop." The single word carried 39 years of disappointment, frustration, and finally, liberation. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn your approval," Damon continued, standing slowly. "Building this company the way you wanted, making decisions you'd endorse, living the life you designed for me. But I'm done." He moved to stand beside Leah's chair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Leah Monroe is the most ethical, intelligent, compassionate person I've ever known. If loving her makes me unfit to lead this company in your eyes, then perhaps this company isn't worth leading. You're making a mistake, son." "No, I'm finally making a choice. My choice." Catherine Walsh cleared her throat. "In light of this new evidence, I move to table any discussion of disciplinary action pending a full investigation into the conduct of all parties involved." The motion passed, 6 votes to 1. As the board members filed out, Harrison remained seated, his empire of manipulation crumbling around him. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Damon replied. The only question now is whether you want to salvage some relationship with your son or lose everything out of pride. For a moment, Harrison looked older than his 68 years, a man who'd played the game so long he'd forgotten what winning actually meant. "I was trying to protect you," he said finally. "No, you were trying to control me. There's a difference." Outside in the hallway, Marcus lingered awkwardly. "Thank you," Leah said, squeezing his hand. "You saved us." Marcus blushed. "Trevor wants to make things right, too. He's prepared to testify in any legal proceedings, return the money, whatever it takes. Tell him we appreciate that," Damon said. "And Marcus, there's a permanent position waiting for you here when you graduate, if you want it." As Marcus walked away, grinning despite everything, Leah felt something she hadn't experienced in days. "Hope, is it over?" she asked. "The board investigation, probably. The media circus will die down eventually. My father..." Damon shrugged. "That's going to take time. And us?" He turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Us? We're just getting started." As he kissed her in the hallway of Blake Digital, surrounded by the whispered conversations of employees and the distant hum of corporate life, Leah realized that some battles were worth fighting, and some love stories were worth the war. The truth, as it turned out, set them free. 3 weeks after the board meeting that changed everything, Leah stood in Damon's office, their office now, officially, watching him field calls from reporters who had finally gotten the real story. The Chicago Tribune's front page headline read, "Blake Digital CEO Vindicated, Father's Conspiracy Exposed." The accompanying article detailed Harrison Blake's resignation from the board, the ongoing investigation into his surveillance activities, and the company's new ethics policies. But it was the smaller headline in the business section that made her smile. "Love Conquers Corporate. Blake Digital's power couple defies convention. The Wall Street Journal wants an interview," Damon said, ending his latest call. "Something about modern workplace relationships and changing corporate culture. Are you going to do it? Only if you do it with me." He moved around his desk, pulling her into his arms with the easy familiarity they'd developed over the past weeks. "We're in this together, remember?" The investigation had moved swiftly once Marcus and Trevor's evidence came to light. Harrison Blake had been quietly forced to resign from Blake Digital's board, his 40% stake transferred to a trust that would sell gradually to prevent market disruption. Trevor had returned every penny of his payment and was now working exclusively for a photography collective that specialized in nature and wildlife, as far from corporate espionage as he could get. Marcus had become something of a celebrity among the interns, his courage in speaking truth to power earning him respect throughout the company. He'd also started dating Iris from the 4th floor, a development that made Beverly clap her hands with delight every time she saw them together. "There's something I want to show you," Damon said, leading her to the window. Below, workmen were installing a new sign on the building's facade. Instead of the stark Blake Digital security that had dominated the Chicago skyline for years, elegant script now read, "Blake Monroe Digital Solutions." Leah's breath caught. "You changed the company name? We changed it. You're the chief of organizational psychology now, remember? Your insights, your compassion, your ability to see people as more than just resources. That's the future of this company." It had been her idea to restructure Blake Digital's approach to corporate culture. Instead of the rigid hierarchy that had dominated under Harrison's influence, they were implementing flexible work arrangements, mental health support, and ethical guidelines that prioritized employee well-being alongside profit margins. The changes were already showing results. Employee satisfaction scores had jumped 30% in just 3 weeks. Client retention was at an all-time high. And the company's reputation, initially damaged by the scandal, had rebounded stronger than ever as the true story emerged. "Your father called again this morning," Leah said gently. Damon's expression tightened slightly. The relationship with Harrison remained complicated, marked by cautious phone calls and conversations that danced around 20 years of hurt and manipulation. "What did he say?" "That he's proud of what we're building here, and that She hesitated. "He asked if he could take us to dinner sometime. Just the 3 of us." "What did you tell him?" "That it was your decision to make." Damon was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city that had witnessed their entire journey. "Maybe it's time. He can't hurt us anymore." The intercom buzzed, and Beverly's voice filled the office. "Your 4 o'clock is here." "Actually," Damon said, "could you reschedule? There's somewhere else I need to be." An hour later, they stood on the shore of the lake where everything had begun. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. The same dock stretched into the dark water. The same fire pit waited for evening flames. But everything felt different now. "Do you remember what you told me that first night here?" Damon asked, taking her hands. "I told you a lot of things that night. You said some things were worth the risk." "They are." She squeezed his fingers. "We are." He reached into his jacket pocket, and Leah's heart stopped as he pulled out a small velvet box. "I know it's been a whirlwind. I know we've barely had time to breathe, let alone think about the future. But I also know that I don't want to face another day without you by my side." He dropped to one knee on the wooden dock, the late afternoon sun casting golden highlights in his dark hair. "Leah Monroe, you've changed everything about my life. You've made me braver, kinder, more honest than I ever knew I could be. You've shown me what it means to fight for something that matters, to choose love over fear, to build something beautiful out of the chaos." Tears streamed down her cheeks as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured starlight. "Will you marry me? Will you help me keep building this life we've started? Will you let me love you for the rest of whatever comes next?" The yes was barely a whisper, but it carried across the water like a promise. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and when he stood to kiss her, the world felt infinite with possibility. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love your courage, your vulnerability, your terrible jokes during board meetings. I love the way you see the best in people, even when they don't see it themselves. I love the man you are when you think no one's watching. You're always watching," he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Someone has to keep you in line." As the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat by the fire pit, making plans for a wedding, for a life, for all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. "Any regrets?" Damon asked, watching flames dance against the darkening sky. Leah considered the question seriously. The past month had been a hurricane of change: new job, new responsibilities, new relationship with the media, new dynamics with colleagues who now saw her as more than just an intern. "Only one," she said finally. "What's that?" "I regret not wearing the blue dress more often." "You really did notice everything about me, didn't you?" His laugh echoed across the water, rich and free and full of joy. "Everything," he confirmed, pulling her closer. "And I plan to keep noticing for the next 50 years or so." As stars began to appear overhead, reflecting like diamonds on the lake's surface, Leah realized that some love stories didn't end with a kiss or a proposal, or even a happy ending. They ended with a beginning, and this was theirs. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office, casting golden patterns across the mahogany desk where 2 coffee cups sat side by side, his black, hers with cream and sugar, a small tradition that had survived countless early meetings, late nights, and the beautiful chaos of building a life together. Leah Blake, the name still made her smile, looked up from her laptop as her husband of 18 months ended his call with their Tokyo clients. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light, a daily reminder of the dock by the lake, of promises made and kept. "The expansion is approved," Damon said, loosening his tie with the same gesture that had once made her pulse race. It still did, if she was being honest. "Blake Monroe Digital Solutions will have offices in 12 countries by next spring." "Nervous?" she asked, knowing him well enough to see the excitement tempered by responsibility in his gray-green eyes. "Terrified," he admitted with the honesty that had become his trademark since learning to love without walls. "But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means we're doing something that matters." Their company had become a model for ethical corporate culture, featured in Harvard Business School case studies and international management journals. Leah's organizational psychology innovations had revolutionized how they approached employee well-being, while Damon's strategic vision had expanded their digital security solutions into humanitarian applications, protecting aid organizations, documenting human rights violations, securing communications for journalists in dangerous regions. "Beverly wants to know if you're ready for the 10:30, Leah said, checking her schedule. "The university presentation, Northwestern's graduate program, full circle." She stood, smoothing her navy dress, not the blue one that had started everything, but one that carried the same confidence, the same sense of possibility. They walked together to the elevator, past walls now lined with photos of their team, their projects, their impact. The stark corporate portraits of the Harrison Blake era had been replaced with images of real people doing meaningful work. Marcus leading a cybersecurity training in rural Kenya, Trevor documenting wildlife conservation efforts, Iris presenting mental health initiatives at a UN conference. "Any word from your father?" Leah asked as they descended. Damon's relationship with Harrison had evolved slowly, carefully, like trust rebuilt from ash. Weekly dinners had become monthly check-ins, which had gradually grown into something resembling genuine connection. Harrison had even walked Leah down the aisle at their wedding, her own father having returned to their lives just months before, drawn back by newspaper articles that finally showed his daughter the success he'd always known she could achieve. "He's flying in next week for the board meeting, and," Damon paused, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "he wants to take us shopping for baby furniture." Leah's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, where their secret had been growing for exactly 8 weeks. They'd planned to wait until the second trimester to share the news, but Harrison Blake had developed an uncanny ability to read between the lines of his son's happiness. "You told him?" "I didn't have to. He took one look at you during Sunday dinner and said, 'When are you due?' I've never seen Beverly cry happy tears in a board meeting before." The elevator opened onto the main floor, where employees called out greetings, where the atmosphere hummed with purpose instead of fear. Through the glass doors, Leah could see the Northwestern students waiting in the lobby, young faces full of ambition and uncertainty, just like she'd been not so long ago. "Ready to inspire the next generation?" Damon asked. "Ready to tell them the truth," she replied. "That success isn't just about climbing ladders or accumulating wealth. It's about finding work that feeds your soul, people who challenge you to be better, and the courage to fight for what matters." They stepped into the lobby together, and Leah caught sight of their reflection in the polished steel doors. A woman in her late 20s with confidence in her bearing and love in her eyes. A man in his early 40s who'd learned to lead with his heart as much as his mind. Partners in every sense of the word. One of the students, a young woman with nervous energy and intelligent eyes that reminded Leah of herself, stepped forward. "Mrs. Blake, I'm Emma Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you for agreeing to speak to our program." "Call me Leah," she replied, extending her hand. "And the pleasure is ours. Tell me, Emma, what draws you to organizational psychology?" "I want to change how people experience work, make it more human, more meaningful." "I know it sounds naive, but it doesn't sound naive at all," Damon interrupted gently. "It sounds like exactly the kind of thinking that changes the world." As they led the students to the conference room, Leah felt the familiar thrill of possibility. These young minds would inherit the corporate world she and Damon were reshaping. Some would build on their work, others would create entirely new paradigms. All would carry forward the lesson that business could be both profitable and compassionate. The presentation went beautifully. Students asked thoughtful questions about work-life integration, ethical leadership, and the challenges of maintaining values in competitive markets. When one young man asked about their relationship, how they navigated power dynamics and professional collaboration, Leah and Damon exchanged the look that had become shorthand for entire conversations. "The key," Leah said, "is remembering that love, whether romantic, familial, or the love of meaningful work, isn't a weakness to be managed. It's a strength to be channeled. And sometimes," Damon added, "you have to be willing to risk everything you think you want to discover what you actually need." After the students left, buzzing with inspiration and possibility, Leah and Damon stood alone in the conference room where they'd first almost kissed, where Beverly had once interrupted a moment that changed everything. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question from that night by the lake. Leah looked out at the Chicago skyline, at the city that had witnessed their entire journey. Then she looked at her husband, her partner, her best friend, the father of the child growing beneath her heart. "Only one," she said with a smile. "What's that?" "I regret that we can only live this love story once." Damon pulled her close, and as he kissed her in the afternoon light streaming through windows that had once felt like barriers, but now seemed like doorways to infinite possibility, Leah thought about the young woman she'd been, afraid, ambitious, desperately hoping that somewhere in this vast world there was a place for her dreams. That woman had been right to hope. Love had conquered fear. Truth had defeated manipulation, and two hearts brave enough to fight for each other had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything that once seemed impossible. Some stories end. The best ones begin again, every single day. Thank you for following Damon and Leah's incredible journey from that first elevator ride to this beautiful new beginning. What part of their love story touched your heart the most? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.